Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Full Life. We're so excited to have you with us again today. We're also very, very pumped up, at least I am, about this show today, as we'll be looking at the life and witness of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. We'll be talking with Steve, who for us, we know very well, but you guys may not know as well because he works behind the scenes and helps us look good, or at least he tries his best to help us look good. But this is a play that he's in looking at the life and witness of Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer is one of my personal favorites, person I've learned a lot from. He has two books, Life Together and The Cost of Discipleship, which I've always enjoyed because they remind us that we're meant to do this life together. They remind us that God calls us to be disciples of Jesus, yes, but also disciples who make disciples. And the best way to do that is to do life together. Another aspect of Bonhoeffer's life that I've grown to really appreciate was his role here in the United States, attending Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, and how he was able to see what it's like to be a minority group that's persecuted by the government, a minority group that maybe is taken advantage of, and how in spite of all of that, he's able to see how it didn't erode faith. And I think that had a direct fruit and direct bearing when he goes back to Nazi Germany and is able to not only fight for the least of these, but fight in the name of Jesus. So hopefully you enjoyed the show. I think it's going to be great. And I'm so glad you're with us again. So yeah, enjoy.
Steve, come on out and join us from behind the shadows.
Hey, guys.
There he is.
Hi, Steve.
How you doing?
Our very own Steve is also an actor, and he was recently involved in a production about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Mm-hmm. And he is going to be in an encore presentation of that play. And I'll let you talk about the circumstances of how you got involved and what's going on with this next production. And we'll start there. Steve, tell us how you got involved in that.
Well, I'll tell you what's really fascinating to me is the fact that when it comes to Dietrich Bonhoeffer, about 2 months ago, I had no idea who this person was. I had been searching through Facebook, and a friend of mine was talking about how they were going to be working on a new production. And they're like, does anybody I know speak German? And I was just like, well, I took some German dialect courses and some of what was it? Not just German dialect, but pronunciation as a part of my vocal performance major. When I was in college, I was like, I know some pronunciation if that's what you need. And he's like, great. Want to be the lead? I'm like, I'm sorry. Like, want to be the lead in my play? I'm working on a play. And it was really fascinating. I mean, you want to talk about a man moment like we like to on this show. I mean, that was huge for me because there are many times in my life where I find myself in my heart just kind of letting out there certain things. And one of the things that had been on my heart at that time was, I wish there was like a play of the month club or something like that, because I'm kind of starved for some really good production, something to read, some really good material. And little did I know, boom, literally weeks after that happened, the beams are creaking, fell into my lap, and I learned about Lutheran pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
Tell us about Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
Well, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, fascinatingly enough, I had no idea that this gentleman even existed.
Right.
And it's so funny because, looking at the way his name was pronounced in German, I would ask people like that I knew. I mean, my parents were both theology teachers, and I'd be like, do you guys know Dietrich Bonhoeffer? And they're like, who? Dietrich, he's a Lutheran pastor. Bonhoeffer? Yeah.
We had that discussion. Jenny and I. Bonhoeffer camp.
Yeah, they said, I think he had this concept, cheap grace. I think he was in a concentration camp. So that pretty much started the tip of the iceberg of my studies with this Lutheran pastor who actually he started out with this fellowship in America. He was in New York City. And in that point in time, he actually learned about the plight of the African American community in our time around World War II and the Great Depression. And that had such a huge impact on him. He ended up going back to Germany, recognizing the heat that was coming from the Third Reich, and saw where things were moving. And, he became a proponent to hopefully save the German church, because at that point they were, Hitler was working on making the church just this a very unchristian sort of thing, and mostly to kind of convert it to work towards his means in less of a Christian situation. And so Dietrich Bonhoeffer was really, really struggling with how to maintain a truly Christian life for the German people, and to teach and preach the word of Jesus while not also rubbing up against the Third Reich. But in the end, he ended up having to, speak out against Hitler and work against Hitler in such a way that wound him up in a concentration camp.
It was really fascinating to learn about him, because I think that concept of, making sure that Jesus stays at the center of your life and how you navigate the policy and everything going on around you, politics or otherwise, is really a concept that is very relevant, I have to say. I think that's relevant today. I think a lot of people are going through that and grappling through that in various ways.
Truly, I when I was reading The Beams Are Creaking, I couldn't tell you, just like the way that it was really speaking to the zeitgeist right now. And I was just like, this is crazy. But at the same time, like we did the show, and after the show had finished, it was a Zoom production, like most things are these days in our pandemic life. And we were just kind of coming down from the performance, and all of a sudden the producer, John Hatterline, his brother Don, directed it. The producer's like, "Oh yeah, Doug Anderson, the writer, wants your phone number, Steve." And I'm like, "Huh? Okay." So I'm like, "Sure, go ahead." And next thing I knew, I got a call from Doug Anderson, who said watching our production had kind of lit a fire under him. And within 24 hours, he emailed me again and said, "Look, I can't stop thinking about it. I feel like this is important. I would like you to please play the role again with my company here in Vermont." And it was just an absolute honor to receive that request. And so that's what we're working on now.
Wow, I can't wait to see you in this.
Thank you.
I'm really excited about
Well,
that.
he sort of reminds me of him anyways. Like when he told us he was going to play, I'm like, oh, you actually sort of look like him,
That's right. You had asked me about my glasses, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay. And I just actually I have them right here. Hold on.
Yeah.
Put on my stage glasses, and you just went crazy. I was just like, hello. Hi.
I know. Oh my.
Like I'll be shaving this off and whatnot, but it was.
Now you have to keep that on the rest of the show. So Carolyn and Jenny, I'll start with Carolyn. What was your experiences with Bonhoeffer before?
Well, my husband, and he just brought me in what the book was that he read of his. I mean, reading his book, it was The Cost of Discipleship. Do you remember that book?
Yes.
And it radically changed my husband, because, and I love how you're saying it sort of mirrors a little bit of where we are today, because he was trying to stand up in the midst of people who it wasn't so popular to believe the way that we believe. And I love, my husband brought me this quote, if I can give it to you just real quick. I'm going to have to put my glasses on so I can.
All right.
I have to say, let me put my eyes on so I can see. But it said, he said, a call to be more faithful in radical obedience to Christ, and a severe rebuke, I love this, against comfortable Christianity. Cheap grace is preaching forgiveness without requiring repentance, baptism without church discipline, and communion without confession. I mean, this guy was on fire for Jesus Christ, and there was not a middle ground for him. He was sold out, and I think that's why he began to go and save the Jews. I mean, he got radically transformed by Christ.
Well, yeah. Truly. You read my quote, girl.
I know, I had it too, right here.
Sorry. Blame my husband.
Well, I mean, it really is. I mean, because honestly, Joe, you probably know this. I teach this a lot. Cheap grace is something I address a lot, because it's come into the church and it has overtaken the church. And, I even kind of partnered it with what we're dealing with in society today. And I said, listen, if we in the church have a problem with the lawlessness that we're seeing in our country, let's start with the church. because we taught lawlessness. We said, oh, because of Jesus, there's no law. We're lawless. That's cheap grace. And so, I mean, that is probably why that resonated, but obviously resonated with all of us. That says something. I want to keep going. And you stopped actually a little bit early.
Yeah.
It goes on to say cheap grace is grace without discipleship. Grace, or did you read this? Grace without the cross.
No, keep going.
Keep going.
Jesus Christ living incarnate. And then I love this that he said, only he who believes is obedient. And only he who is obedient believes. And that's a big thing, Joe. You also know this about us. You know, we use the term believers a lot for us in our faith, because I think, you know, the term Christianity has lost some of its meaning. People say, oh, I'm a Christian. Oh, I'm a Christian. Oh yeah, I go to church on Easter. I'm a Christian, you know? And because we have, as pastors, we have done a disservice to the church and preached this idea of cheap grace. It's kind of permeated our culture. And so now we have this new understanding of our Christianity based on the culture. And there's so much of it that's not even the Bible anymore. There's so much of it that's gotten out of line with the Bible. And I think Bonhoeffer was facing the same thing as he watched people venerate Hitler. There are so many times he talks about the fact that when you put anybody in a place of an idol, I mean, preachers were saying things like, we need to thank the Holy Spirit for bringing a man like Adolf Hitler to revive the church in our nation. They were literally making an idol out of this man. And I think that's such a key that he tapped into first. He didn't just tap into opinion. Well, I don't like this. This guy scares me. I don't like it. First thing he tapped into is, hey, wait a minute. There's something right now happening biblically that's wrong.
I think he also shifted into something that was even more controversial when he talked about a religionless church, or religionless Christianity, because the fact is that he felt that there were a lot of people who were just going through the motions, and that this Christian community, even that he had done his thesis on the Christian community and how we all truly, need to come together. It is when we're all together in community that we are together in Christ. But he was finding that, there was still a lot of splitting within the church. And actually, at that point in time, there was a more bourgeois group of people who were spending time in church. And a lot of the working class, they had other things they had to do to put food on the table. These were hard times. But regardless, finding that even just going through the motions, which he was seeing happening a lot in Germany, was kind of going away from the Christian teachings and what it means to be an actual Christian. So he was wondering if maybe religion isn't the way to it, with all the separate religions and splits and factions that there are out there. So,
gosh, it sounds like what we do here on The Full Life. I'm just saying.
You got that.
Yeah. But it was so powerful because he was doing it in a time where, and I feel like what you just said, Jenny, is exactly the truth. It's sort of where we are now, because if we're not careful, Christianity is being watered down and taking on different religious type of things. And that's exactly what he was getting upset about. What she just said right there, where they can take scriptures and begin to think that it's okay to murder other people, to kill people, that they are less than. There is nothing in the Word of God that said that. There's nothing as a Christ follower that said that. Now, maybe in their religious, and that's what he began to stand up against, is he's like, we've got to bring it back to this Word.
Yeah.
And when I read the Word, this isn't what the Word is saying. And I really believe that we're going to need some more people today to stand up just like him. I think we should really use him. I think it's so timely that you're doing this today, Steve.
Those are some big shoes to fill, let me say, because one of the things that he talks about with discipleship is that the call of Jesus is the call to die.
Wow.
Yeah.
Try to take that on. It makes you feel like a teeny tiny person. And he was just a mountain, and it blows my mind that 2 months ago I had no idea that this mountain existed.
Well, how many of us would leave what he left to come to America? All of a sudden, he gets to be the lecturer. That's putting him up on a pedestal. Our flesh wouldn't we love that? We've escaped everything. And for him, the calling was so great. He said, I can't stay here. I've got to go back. I've got to go back. And it's when you say die to ourself, it's so against what this world is teaching us, because this world now is teaching us that it's all about my comfort.
Yeah.
It's all about me. It's all about my glory. I mean, I'm going to say this, forgive me, everyone out there, but even in our churches, we are making them superstars everywhere instead of, and I'm not knocking, I'm just saying that that's sort of the reality instead of making Jesus who we're leading people to, it's sort of dangerous.
It is kind of dangerous. And, makes me think of the prophet Jeremiah. Jeremiah had to go and say to the people, no, God's not happy with this. And all the other prophets are coming around going, Jeremiah, you need to bring it down and just join the club, join the party, join what we're telling people right now. What you're saying is bumming people out. Stop with bumming people out. You got to go along with what we're saying, and honestly, that's kind of what he did with, as I still say Bonhoeffer, excuse me, Bonhoeffer, say with the Southern accent, you can say Bonhoeffer. What he did was he had to rise up against what everyone else is saying. And I think we're coming to a time where there are those of us that are going to have to, as you guys were just saying, get out of our comfort zone and go, what, this might not be popular to say. It's not popular to say that, that Jesus actually, told us to obey to obey law. His last words were, depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. I never knew you. We don't talk about that. That's not what Jesus said. It's not popular. It's not the cultural narrative that no, go along with what everyone wants to hear. But that's not what God is looking for. He's looking for Bonhoeffers that are willing to say, listen, there's some stuff that's being taught that's anti-God, therefore it's anti-Christ. And how much am I loving you to ignore that information? So I love that you guys are doing this. I love we're having this conversation.
Well, clearly we think the example of Bonhoeffer is quite a strong one for all of us, even today. And to promote Steve and his new production even further, we are so privileged to have with us today to welcome the writer of the play, The Beams Are Creaking. Please welcome from Vermont, Doug Anderson. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Director, executive director of Town.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
He is the artistic director of what theater there in Vermont?
Town Hall Theater. About 20 years ago, I stumbled on an old building right in the middle of downtown Middlebury that the town had forgotten had been a theater. It was an old vaudeville theater. And I immediately said, we'll take it. There was no I didn't have a dime in my pocket, but 20 years later, it's a thriving performing arts center, and it's a very exciting place to work.
Awesome.
Well, that's a story in itself outside of Bonhoeffer. I think we need to hear one day.
Yeah.
It's a good tale. And it's a good tale of community. Everybody suddenly saw an idea for that building, which probably would have come down. And I now know everybody in town and love everybody in town, and they come to the theater. And I've got a theory that a town needs a big room. And we do memorial services there. We do things with fifth graders there. We do grand opera there. We do anything the town wants to use that room for. It can use the room.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
Well, Doug, how did you first come to know of Bonhoeffer, and tell us about writing the play and how you got to that?
Yeah. Again, it's a little embarrassing in that I wrote this play over 40 years ago. As I say, do the math. I was actually 22 at the time. I was in graduate school, but it started when I was an undergraduate at Kenyon in Ohio. And I was a theater kid doing lots of plays, but religion always fascinated me. Also, I was fascinated by the connection between religion and theater. Theater in the Western world begins in ancient Greece with Dionysian dances.
Right.
So I somebody said to me my senior year, they said, you take one more class and write a paper, we'll give you a religion major as well. I came across the book Letters and Papers from Prison.
Right.
And this is the book that Bonhoeffer wrote when he had been arrested and he was in Tegel prison outside Berlin for some time. And, I was thinking about this today, knowing I was going to talk to you, but he loved prison. In the same way that this might be an unpopular thing to say, I'm enjoying. The pandemic has been a horrible, horrible thing, but it has brought me home. It has brought me sitting here, getting back to projects, writing again, not hustling every day to get up the next show. You know what I mean? And it has been a gift. It has been an amazing gift for me. And I'm doing a lot of writing now. Well, Bonhoeffer felt that same way, but of course, in a much more acute way. And he was in jail and he wrote a lovely book, which I really recommend, called Letters and Papers from Prison. the letters and papers had to be smuggled out of prison by a faithful guard. Otherwise, we would never know about this book. And he wrote poetry, and he did a lot of thinking. He was working on his major book in prison called Ethics, which he never really finished. But prior to going to prison, he wrote The Cost of Discipleship, which I think is it's the introductory book, I think, of a lot of people. And it's interesting. And so anyway, so I was a theater major, and I was getting a religion major, and I started work on this play because the story is astonishing. And if you're going to write a play, you better have an astonishing story to tell. And you've covered a lot of it, but even the details of it are frankly unbelievable. The ironies, as Steve knows, having done the play, are absolutely remarkable, and the sheer courage of this man. So it's I used to think of myself as a playwright, and I've written several plays. This is the one that has survived. It has been performed all over the world. A lot of colleges have done it, and but it's the central role of Bonhoeffer. It's a larger role than Hamlet. He is in every single scene. I don't know why the young playwright did that, but he did. And I have never seen a production. Never saw a production where I was really taken with. The actors were actory, and they didn't get Bonhoeffer. And to tell you the honest truth, I've never seen a single performance of this play, and I've seen dozens of them, which I thought the leading guy, did it. And so the Chicago area company was doing it a few weeks ago, and they invited me to come watch it. And I'm like, all right, I'll watch 10 minutes of it, on Zoom. And I watched the whole thing. And I watched the whole thing because of Steve. And that's a true story. And no one had quite captured the humility and the strength simultaneously. We had guys who were fighters and firebrands, and we had guys who were just sort of very, but they never really held my interest. And so I watched the whole thing, really, to my surprise. And minutes after, I called up Steve and I said, "You don't know me. I wrote that play. I want you to do it for my theater." So it's wonderful for me to get back to it after all these years and sink into the play again.
Well, tell us a little bit how you had to adapt it to come to Zoom, because I'm sure that's a little bit different than being on a live stage audience,
Yeah, it's really tricky, and it's something, of course, all performance organizations are facing now. Dance companies, opera companies, theater companies.
Yes.
How do we adapt to this new reality? And one of the nice things about this is one of the reasons why I wanted to do this also is that my theater has to learn how to make this work. And the great thing is that since Steve has done it already, and I guess Steve is like your tech guy. Is that true? I always he was the star of the show.
Pretty much. No.
He's not the star?
Guy this
he
time.
is the star of the show.
Because if the tech doesn't work, no one's working. So he's the star.
Right?
So
he is the star.
We've been learning how to do it, and Steve is teaching about us how to do things like you can actually put the Bonhoeffer living room as a background in back of everybody. Or if they're at the Olympics, we can actually put the Olympic stand behind people. And I'm sure you've done this kind of thing when you've done Zoom. I'm technologically illiterate. I knew nothing about it. Finding ways that people can talk simultaneously while they're on different screens, so you get that lively interplay that you get in the theater. It's been a learning curve, and we're still learning. It's not going to be the same thing. There are certain things like the introduction of music and people singing simultaneously that Zoom just doesn't do very well. So we're making changes, but they won't be major ones. Basically, it will be the experience that people have in the theater. One hopes.
That was really the most interesting part for me to think about, Doug, was how you decided to adapt this, because Dietrich Bonhoeffer's life is so vast, and even in the original adaptation of the play, that's really what interests me. How you decided to take this man's huge life and try to get all of the details and kind of compress them. I mean, obviously, you weren't able to use everything, and you had to take some artistic license. But I'm very fascinated to learn more about the process of how you adapted the play.
I immediately went to Eberhard Bethge's biography. Bethge himself was a fascinating character. He was a student of Bonhoeffer's and became his best friend, his dearest friend. And after Bonhoeffer's death, Bethge wrote a very large biography, which it's just full of detail, and one just has to somehow simmer that down to the basic plot points without losing the theology and the point of view that he has. One can just treat. And so I did this in a way that no playwriting class could have possibly taught. The first act plays like a political thriller. And it has so many wonderful details. For example, he made an important speech, which he titled "The Young People's New View of What a Führer Should Be." And he gave this speech on the radio just after Hitler was elected. His family did not want him to give this speech. He insisted on doing it. It's a fabulous speech. And midway through, they pulled the plug on him.
Wow.
The government pulled the plug. He kept talking, and music started playing over him talking. He didn't even know till the end of the speech that no one heard half of it. So he went home, prints it up, and sends it to everybody he knows. He's not going to be silenced. Now, that kind of detail, you can't make that stuff up.
No.
And it happens. So I'll give you one other thing to give. So he eventually gets involved with people, some in his own family, who were involved in a plot to kill Hitler. Very nearly succeeded, and they wanted Dietrich because of his ecumenical work. He had contacts all over the globe, and you just can't do an assassination or a push in-house. I mean, you have to make sure everybody else or a lot of other people know what you're doing and are going to be there to support you, because you're going to need it. You're going to need that support. And so they sort of adopted Dietrich as a PR guy in a way, in a very loose way. And so the day they're waiting for the phone call to hear Hitler is killed, and they're all nervous because they don't know if the plot's going to work, they're preparing for his father's birthday party, and a Nazi officer appears at the door. Wow. They panic. Man. He's looking for Bonhoeffer. Dietrich says, "I'm here. I'm Dietrich Bonhoeffer." He says, "I'm not looking for you. I'm looking for your father. It's his birthday. The Hitler's giving him a medal." What a scene. And so they all sit there waiting to see if the phone is going to ring while the Nazi agent is giving this speech to his father. His father was a famous psychoanalyst and educator. Right. And Hitler was giving him a medal. I mean, this is cinematic, is it not?
Yeah.
Stuff that a great screenwriter would invent. I didn't have to invent any of it. It's all there. And there's so many more stories. So the story lent itself to dramatization, but also I was equally taken with the ideas, and you've touched on them quite a lot. But the idea of cheap grace, and the other side of cheap grace is what he called costly grace. That it's going to cost you to stand up. It's going to cost you to go out and defend people who are helpless.
Yeah.
And that is what we are called for. Not just going to church and praying. We are called to, read the Sermon on the Mount, for God's sakes. But I mean, we are called to go out, and you can believe something, but unless you put those beliefs into action, they are worth nothing, according to Dietrich Bonhoeffer. So he actually
works is dead.
Exactly. And so he actually splits with Hitler's church, which nobody would have dreamed of doing, and set up his own seminary to teach people about essentially social justice and applying their belief. And then Hitler pulled the plug on the seminary as well. So he was clearly a marked man, but with each of these setbacks, he didn't stop. He kept writing, he kept speaking out. And that's a great lesson for any of us in any generation, it seems to me. So I wrote the first act to be a kind of a political thriller, and it ends just when they're coming to pick him up and take him off to prison. And then the second act is simply a two-man play. It's a very different tone, and it's Bonhoeffer in jail with the guard, and it's a true story, all the guards loved him in jail. They absolutely loved him. And it's a kind of extended theological discussion between this theologian and just a guy, an old soldier, not particularly happy with Hitler, shows up to clean the floor, and they have an extended discussion about all kinds of issues. And so what I really want is kind of an introduction to Bonhoeffer's mind and his way of thinking, something that would make people then say, I've got to go buy that book. I've got to go explore this further. So he talks about cheap grace. He talks about religionless Christianity. He also talks about this interesting concept of what he called the God of the gaps, that our religion now doesn't speak to strong, independent people. It doesn't know what to say to strong, independent people. And so it sort of caters to people who are weak, of spirit or weak in their financial situation, or it sort of caters to the needy people in the world. But can we have a strong church that speaks to strong people? And that's just one of many ideas that you go clang. you go,
I know.
What?
Out of the gaps.
What? And once you hear Bonhoeffer say it, you go, but of course.
What's the lesson or the takeaway that you want the audience to walk away with after watching this production? Obviously, you want them to be entertained and enjoy and learn. Mm-hmm. But is there something specific you want them to walk with?
You want to do enough to get that people say, this is a fascinating character. I'm fascinated by what he has to say. I've got to pursue this further. That's all really you can hope for.
Well, what do you think, like, just in all the studying that you've done at Bonhoeffer, what was the moment that changed him so drastically to become so the other way? I mean, that is a huge, when he says costly, you and I think, oh, it's going to cost me a little bit of discomfort, No, we're talking about his life, prison. It was everything for him. When he says costly, that has a deep meaning to it. What do you think it was the moment for him that he was willing to make that jump, that leap to say all out? Because I think that we need to hear that, because I really believe in my heart, God is trying to knock on a lot of us as Christ followers for that same thing, to say, are you ready to make that commitment of all out? Because it's going to cost you something.
Right. I don't think it was a single epiphany. You know what I mean? Yeah. I think it was a lifetime of stuff. Even when he was still connected with the church early on, he took a confirmation class, which they did in the Lutheran church, of the toughest kids in the poorest neighborhood. And he went into that neighborhood and started preaching in that neighborhood. And his minister, whoever was over him, never thought he would bring any of these kids around. He said, no, these are the kids who need us right now. Let's go there. In New York, he didn't think much of the Union Theological Seminary. He didn't. He actually said at one point, there's no real theology here. He thought he was kind of light years away ahead of the Americans. But what he loved was getting into the Black community, experiencing Black life. He said at one time, he had never met people like Black religious people who he felt religion colored their conversation. They spoke about God and Christ all the time, Jesus all the time. It was a way of life for them. It blew him away that somebody could so fully, and their community was their church community, and the church was, and it was a very, very strong emotional feeling. Again, I think time and again, it's about Bonhoeffer getting into the community, and he talked about that a lot. Get out of the church, get into the community, meet life as it exists, not as you read about it in some rarefied tone, and then deal with life as it exists, deal with injustice as it exists.
Not to besmirch the man, though. I will say that one of the great things about him, from what I've been studying, you don't see it much in the play, but he did struggle with a lot of courageous issues. There were different points in time where, things were getting hot with the church in Germany, and so he actually took a fellowship in London, if I remember correctly. And one of his prior professors, it was Karl Barth, right? Is that?
Yes.
Who was? Yeah. Literally, wrote him a letter saying, "Hey, stop wussing out. Come on back. This is your home. These are the people who need you. Your home is on fire." Another example, Sabine, his twin sister married Gerhard. What was the last name? I forget, Doug.
Give me a moment. I forget as well.
It's just escaping me.
Me too.
But, the fact remains that Gerhard's father had passed away, and Gerhard was Jewish. And at one point, Bonhoeffer was actually asked to preach at Gerhard's father's funeral, but because of the tension at the time, he wound up declining. And I believe he wrote a letter later to Gerhard, literally just saying, look, I don't know why I was so afraid at that time, but I got to tell you, I regret the decision that I've made, and I feel very horrible.
That example is so good, Steve. Thank you for bringing that up, because because that struggle to really come to that authenticity and that strength in your faith is real for every single person. So I'm so glad that we have his example of oh no, he's going back and saying, you know what, I did something wrong. You know, he's doing that, what he said in that Cheap Grace quote. He's doing the repentance. He's saying, I'm coming back and saying, I've learned that I can do better now. And I think that's everyone's story in a story of faith.
I think we all need that. Brent, my brother-in-law, has a podcast, and he had a guy on today named Robert Slierdon. And Robert's, he chronicles the great ministers, great men of our faith. One of his things that he talks about is he never writes somebody. They asked him, are you going to write anything about like any living ministers or anybody that maybe just died recently? And he said, you know, I try to wait until when I write about anybody until they've been gone for several years, because I want to write a truthful story, including their shortcomings. Because every single leader has them. They have those times they look back on and go, I wish I hadn't done it like that. Yeah. And he said, some people might say, well, that's exposing their weakness. And he said, no, it's important to show that they had weakness, that they made mistakes, that they went left when they should have gone right, that they went, you know, down when they should have gone up. So I think we need those examples. I love, Steve, that you brought that up. I don't think that disparages him or anything. I think that just brings the humanity of him. I know myself. I've had times where I didn't want to associate with something because someone said, oh, you know, don't associate with that person. And I've had my guilt to go, why did I do that? Why did I do that? So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Sometimes you need to know that people falter on their rise to doing what they need to do, to following their heart, to following God, because it does take a lot of baby steps. And I mean, even in just studying the man himself, I hope I'm taking steps for myself in the right direction, whatever God willing has for me in my future, in my call, in my vocation, you know, and I'm just completely inspired by the man, completely inspired by this play that Doug put together. And I think he's really captured this just amazing spirit of the man too. And I hope that I'm doing it. I'm continuing to do it justice for him. And hopefully we can bring a lot of other viewers who decide to watch the play, you know, to the same sort of understanding, and hopefully coming back, you know, to the fold and moving forward with their faith.
You know, Jenny, if I could just say one thing, because I think you both really nailed it. But an interesting detail, it seemed odd to me, but he actually not only left the church, he started his own sect. And how many people do that? You know,
right.
We've got to start our own sect. And he didn't call it the Church of God, and he didn't call it the Good News. He called it the Confessing Church. Mm-hmm. What a thing to name a sect.
Wow. Yeah.
That was the primary thing in his mind.
When you read the word, you've got David, you've got Moses, you've got all of these people through the Bible that God lets us see their mistakes, because I think we learn more sometimes from mistakes than their successes. I mean, my son, he's in college right now, and he's like, Mom, I love when they show me what I did to mess up, because I can learn from my mistakes.
Yeah.
And I feel like there is such a rawness when we're willing to come off of our own pedestals that we create. I mean, I love Facebook and all that, but I call it fake book because it's not real. I think if we showed people's real lives, we're all broken. We all have weaknesses. We all have things that, no offense, every day is making me fall down before Christ and go, God, without you, I'm nothing.
I have a question for Steve and Doug. How has your work with Bonhoeffer in this play changed you?
There are people that just give a specific example, and such a great example, and you wonder whether or not you can rise to the challenge. But in researching him and in researching his faith, I feel like I can take, like I said earlier, those baby steps to moving forward in my faith. I'm also learning that, you know, maybe history and where we are now are not too horribly different. The fact that the gentleman like him actually saw what was happening in Germany because of the indications he found in the plight of the African American community in the United States. And I think right now there's just so much suffering. To be able to look at this and to recognize and to say to ourselves, hey, don't forget, the only way that we can escape the past is by learning from the past. And so that's one of the things that I've also taken away in my process.
Doug, how has Bonhoeffer changed you?
You know, I came across Bonhoeffer at a very young and fresh and impressionable age. and I've carried him with me, and his basically the ideas of becoming involved in your community, taking risks in your life, which I believe I've taken a few big ones in my life, and just staying connected and not withdrawing from the world. And I've had many other mentors in my life, and many in my family, many of my teachers. I always say, if I ever win an Academy Award, mind you, I will not. But if I ever did, I will just thank all my teachers. Mm-hmm. And some of them I've never met, and Bonhoeffer certainly is one of those. It will, in fact, be free.
Wow.
It's absolutely free. Oh, there might be a donate button on the page somewhere.
I think there should be.
But it is free, and we wanted to make it free to as many people as possible. And that's the one great thing about online performances. My theater seats 225, but the web seats 10,000,
That's right. Thank you so much again for joining us, Doug, and thank you and congratulations to our very own Steve for starring in this production. I'm confident you will be changed by his example and maybe by Steve's performance too.
Just playing.
And thank you both so much for joining us. We'll see you next time here on The Full Life. To watch the encore presentation of The Beams Are Creaking on Sunday, November 1st at 7:30 Eastern, 4:30 Pacific, simply visit www.townhalltheater.org and under the show's graphic, click Book Now to be taken to the broadcast page where you can set up your own reminder. It's free and well worth your time to find out more about Dietrich Bonhoeffer.